is one that I have wanted to do for a very long time. I was just never too sure how to do it or why to do it, but given that we just had a new Pope elected, Pope Leo the 14th, the very first American Pope, although also the very first Peruvian Pope, because he is a dual citizen of the United States and Peru. Which, as somebody who is an American that immigrated to another country, I do think that that's sort of a cool thing overall, that the current Pope is an American that immigrated to another country. Anyway, so that seemed like a good catalyst for me to do this video, which is a topic that interests me to greatly, huge interest to me. And it's because this is something that I personally wasn't really exposed to until much later in life, which I think is part of why I find it so interesting. And I have to imagine that just looking at my viewer demographics, the countries of origin for the people who watch my channel, a lot of you might not be aware as well. A lot of my viewers, the majority are from the United States, and you have another big chunk that's in Canada, and another big chunk that's in Australia, and that's about 95% of my viewership right there is those three countries. And the United States, Canada, and Australia are Protestant countries. The United Kingdom as well is a big chunk of my viewership, again another Protestant country. And Protestant culture is the culture of those countries, which even, with the exception of certain certain geographic areas, even your Catholics, your Protestant Christians will still be influenced by that culture, because it is the overarching culture of the country, the Protestant work ethic, yada yada yada, that is inherent to the American identity. Whereas these other countries, parts of Europe, Italy, Spain, France, all through Latin America, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, these are places that have a Catholic culture. So even the non-Catholics in those countries are influenced by a Catholic social culture, just like the non-Protestants in places like the United States, Canada, the UK are influenced by a Protestant social culture. So that's why until I sort of expanded my horizons and did research myself on this sort of stuff, because I found it so interesting, I wasn't really aware of it. But Folk-Catholicism considers Catholicism of the people, not Catholicism of the church, Catholicism of the people. And it evolved based on an assimilation of past tradition and local influence, and for the most part it grew outside the walls of the church. And I'm gonna get the story a little bit wrong, but I think one interesting thing that happened is there's a period of time in Ireland, I don't know exactly what the rule was, but there's some rule in place where public preaching of the Bible or certain Bible stories was outlawed. So Catholics in Ireland had to basically invent new stories characters from the Bible, but not directly from the Bible, because then I'm like, well, we're not preaching the Bible, we just made up a new story with the same characters trying to deliver a similar message. And there's all sorts of examples of this thing, and sometimes it's an assimilation of pre-Catholic tradition that the church deliberately brings into the church or Catholicifies to, smooth over that transition, because, it's one thing to come sweep into a new area with swords and gunpowder and say, you're all Catholics now, but eventually, you have to maintain that population. You have to keep them happy, because, you might have the swords and the gunpowder now, but eventually your army leaves, eventually this, that, and the other, and you still need to maintain that social cohesion. So you're like, okay, well, those things you guys were already doing before we got there, we'll just find a way to make them Christian now, so you can still do that, just do it while saying Jesus at the end. And it's a tightrope to walk, and I do have to say, I think that the Catholic Church did this sort of cultural assimilation better than just about anybody in history. You look at other countries, other institutions that have tried to go in and seize control of a place and take them over culturally and socially, and there's always pushback, there's always revolt. And I think that unless I'm really missing something blatant here or something that I just don't have the familiarity with, maybe Islam is better at this, maybe Buddhism is better at this. I just don't personally have those touch points, but from what I can tell, the Catholic Church has been the best at doing this sort of thing. So as I sort of touched on Folk-Catholicism, it has a lot of syncretism, usually, not always, but usually with pre-Christian, pagan, or animist beliefs, and the Catholic faith. But again, like I mentioned, sometimes the Catholic Church arrives, and then after they sort of pull back a little bit, these own unique localized beliefs just evolve in these pockets, but oftentimes it is an assimilation of a pre-Christian faith. And again, to their credit, the church has mostly been pragmatic about these things. They recognize that outright condemning the beliefs could lose the faith and trust of the people in those areas. This is, to those people, a part of their faith and practice, so they don't outright endorse the practices in many cases, but they also don't outright condemn them either. They sort of just let it be a sort of gray area. And there's pilgrimages, holy sites, all of these things that the Catholic Church will not say are holy sites, and they will not say that they are pilgrimages, but an entire diocese is going out and going on these pilgrimages, or praying and worshiping at these holy sites, and they're kind of turning a blind eye to it. Oftentimes, these include things that easily could be seen as magical rituals or practices or even witchcraft. And a lot of folk Catholic practices, sort of like I mentioned, they walk a fine line between church-sanctioned practice and outright heretical beliefs. Like I said, it's a huge gray area. So a couple folk saints here. I'm just going to go down a quick list. These are folk saints that are widely venerated in different faiths, but they are not canonized saints by the Catholic Church. So local people in these areas, some areas, will refer to them as saints. They'll pray to them like they're saints. They might have statues or icons of them like they would a saint, but the church has never canonized them as saints, which could be seen as heresy, but again, gray area. The church isn't going to say anything about it. The big one, Santa Muerte, we'll touch on that later. Constantine of Rome, Catherine of Aragon, Simon Bolivar, Marie Laveau in New Orleans, Grigory Rasputin, yes, that Rasputin, and Joseph Stalin, both of them in parts of Russia. I believe these are more Orthodox folk saints in this case, but in certain parts of Russia you will see Orthodox icons of Rasputin and of Stalin, and they are prayed to, they are venerated, all of that. Pablo Escobar, that's a big one. A lot of people say Saint Pablo Escobar. I've seen some images of churches, particularly I think the churches that Escobar himself built, but they'll have images or statues of Pablo inside the church up on the altar. And Jesus Malverde, that's a big one in Mexico. One specific one that always stands out to me is Saint Bridget. Saint Bridget in Ireland. And now there is still some contention on this, but I am of the opinion, and I agree with the scholars who say that Saint Bridget is just straight up a Christianization of the Celtic pagan goddess Brigid. Imbolc is the Celtic Irish pagan spring festival. It is the celebration of the harvest, the lambs, all of that. Imbolc is celebrated on February 1st. And the goddess Brigid was sort of the centerpiece of Imbolc, and the feast day of St. Bridget is February 1st. The traditions of Imbolc were wearing what are now referred to as Bridget crosses, those sort of hand-woven crosses that are like this, but that's like multiple, usually like straw or hay woven together. I'm sure you've seen them. And maintaining a perpetual fire. Those were practices of Imbolc. Those are also practices of St. Bridget's feast day. So, also, both the name Brigid of the goddess and Bridget is in the saint. They come from the Proto-Celtic briganti, which means exalted. And then a lot of the hagiographies are biographies and accounts of the saints. You have biographies, autobiographies, hagiographies, or writings about the saints that are meant to be historical, fact-based. But a majority of the hagiographies we have about Saint Bridget are all rooted in Irish pagan folklore, basically all of them. And of course, Saint Bridget is the patron saint of poetry, healing, protection, and animal husbandry. And Brigid is the goddess of poetry, healing, protection, and animal husbandry. So some people will argue that it's not, it's a separate thing, and some people argue St. Bridget did actually exist, but I really don't find that a very compelling argument. I think it's just straight up. The Catholic Church came into Ireland. They saw this cult of worship that they could not stamp out. They could contend with it, but it wasn't going to go away. So instead, they said, you know what? That goddess you're praying to and worshiping, funny you should mention her. She's a Catholic saint. And they're all like, woo. example of a syncretic practice, again taking old and new and merging them, is Haitian voodoo, vodou. Sorry for pronunciation there. But it's a combination of West and Central African religious practices, obviously, because of the slave trade. Those peoples were mingling with one another. They found the similarities in their religious beliefs, and they sort of syncretized something new between them. And then that merged practice of West and Central African religion, again merged with Catholicism, because the slaves in Haiti, they were forbidden from any sort of religious practice that was not Christian. So the Iwa, the gods in their religion, were equated with saints. So they would sit there and they would have a Catholic altar with multiple saints on the altar, but that saint is actually this Iwa, that saint is that Iwa, that sort of thing. And then it's sort of become its own practice, and you see it through the Caribbean, modern-day Haiti, and then through parts of New Orleans and the American South as well. You'll still see this sort of practice. If you go to New Orleans, you'll go into some like shops, and you'll see saints on the walls, and you might think like people sort of struggle with that because they'll see these saints and these Christian symbols next to things that are not what we would consider Christian, and it can be very confronting for people who haven't been exposed to this stuff. But for example, Saint Peter was equated with Papa Legba. Papa Legba is the Iwa, the spirit of the crossroads, the go-between our God and humanity. Can speak and understand every language on earth. So the equation with St. Peter does kind of make sense in that instance. But this meant that the slaves in Haiti could practice their faith openly while fooling their slave masters, and it's turned into its own sort of thing today. Another funny one that I kind of like, people who are trying to sell their house, but they're struggling to sell their house. They will take a statue of Saint Joseph and they'll bury it upside down in the front garden of their house. And they're basically, this is sort of subsection of folk Catholic beliefs called saint punishment. And people will punish statues or icons of the saints until they're given what they want. Basically like a naughty child who won't listen, so you spank them or hit them until they comply. But so basically, like the whole Saint Joseph is you bury the statue upside down in the front yard of the house that you want to sell. And the idea is you won't dig him up and put him right side up until he sells your house. So you're sort of punishing him for your house not selling. He only gets to stop being punished once the house sells. And there's multiple examples all over. This is especially popular in parts of Europe, like southern Italy. In Spain, you see a lot of saint punishment. People physically hitting a statue of a saint or something like that are not getting what they want. And other examples, I think you see in Latin America as well. In Latin America, you see, especially in more rural areas, especially where maybe the dioceses aren't as strong or you don't have as much church oversight, you'll see a practice of burning fires outside the church doors and sometimes even burning fires inside the church. And that is a Mayan custom, obviously from before the Spanish came through. In southern Italy, I'm not too familiar with Italian geography, but I think that's sort of the Tuscany area. There's a practice called Benedicaria, the magical practices and traditions and rituals of the Lucanians, which were the people who lived in southern Italy before the Romans all came through and took over the whole thing. And then obviously they had their practices they had before Catholicism and Christianity came through. But had to carry out, they use herbs, plants, things like that, and they believe that through the use of herbs and plants, they can communicate and deal with spirits, both good and bad. And those spirits don't just mean ghosts, they do believe in ancestor veneration. They believe that they can communicate and help the spirits of the dearly departed, which is common in lots of cultures. But they also believe that plants, mountains, elements, everything has a spirit. Sort of an animism belief, very similar to maybe like a Japanese Shinto. Because Shinto tells you that there is a spirit, a kami in everything. There's a god of trees, there's a god of... And not only is there a god of trees, there's a god of this forest. And not only is there a god of this forest, there's a god for each tree in this forest, and so on and so forth. Apply that across the board. And you sort of see a similar thing with Benedictaria, which you think is not very compatible with Christianity. But according to them, they say they call themselves devout Catholics. A lot of them go to Mass every Sunday. But a lot of critics say that not really. In Ireland, they have holy wells, water wells, that are pre-Christian built. These water wells, probably they used to be some sort of fairy wells or fey wells, something like that, but Irish Catholics go to these holy wells because they believe that they cure ailments. So people take, let's say somebody is suffering their eyesight or something, or they might go to the holy well and get some water and rub it on their face or their eyes, or that sort of thing. All sorts of different religious practices believe in the healing power of water. There are multiple pilgrimages all across Britain. I know they have holy wells not just in Ireland, but in Scotland and Wales. And Irish priests now have actually begun blessing the wells themselves. So priests will go out to these wells, say the blessing, and so now it's holy water coming out of the wells. And my sort of cynical take on this is that they have sort of been forced to start doing this. I don't think that the Catholic Church in Ireland is probably particularly happy that people are going to these pre-Christian wells and taking the water and thinking that it can cause miracles. But these people aren't going to stop. It's not like, okay, well, if they're not going to stop, let's just go out and do blessings. So now that the people are going and trying to get this healing, is because of our blessing, not because of the magic water. That's my cynical take on that. They also, some Irish Catholics, they make holy ribbons, and they leave them out on their windows for feast days overnight. And they believe that in the night, the spirits of the saints go by and are actually touching the ribbons after the feast day is over. And then they'll take those ribbons and they'll keep them, and they think that they will heal the sick or protect the household from evil spirits. One other one, I can't remember what it's called, but I know in Germany and Bavaria, probably in Munich, but I know there's other parts of Bavaria, there's this big ancient water fountain in a cathedral, and women and couples that are struggling to conceive will go and get water from this fountain. And the local church and all this, they try to claim that medieval era Catholic saints built the well, and that's why the water there has this miraculous property. But all carbon dating like any sort of research has been done on this thing, it predates the construction of the cathedral around it, and it predates the arrival of Christianity in Germany. This fountain, and it's actually contributed to a sort of mother goddess figure that is sort of lost to history called Hulda, and a lot of the Germanic, pre-Christian gods have sort of been lost to time. Same with a lot of the Russian ones. They were pretty thoroughly erased. Ireland as well was very thoroughly erased, which from a historical standpoint is difficult. But we do know that this fountain predates the arrival of Christians in Bavaria. Now the last one, the big one, the biggest folk saint, the one that, if you haven't heard of any of this, you've probably heard of this, even if you didn't know it was a folk saint thing, you might thought it was something else. But that is Santa Muerte, the female folk saint of death in primarily Mexico. I'm sure we've all seen her image, if you didn't know what it was, but a skeletal woman in a robe, usually black, sometimes white, red, green, purple, yellow, blue, depending. And very, very large cult of worship, primarily in Mexico, starting in a silver mining community. A lot of people don't know that, so obviously the big public shrine to Santa Muerte is there in the Tepito Barrio in Mexico City. Very big shrine. Doña Queta maintains that. So a lot of people sort of have the misconception that that's where Santa Muerte worship started, was there in Tepito. But it started in a silver mining community. There's a small church up there. And that's where the sort of the first images of Santa Muerte were discovered. Ed Calderon, he does a great series of podcasts and discussions on the history of Santa Muerte that were fascinating. But it's actually one of the fastest growing folk belief systems in the world. Currently 10 to 20 million people consider themselves devotees of Santa Muerte. So it's a very big thing, and of these folk saints, she is one of the only ones, if maybe not the only one, that has been directly condemned by the Catholic Church. But I can tell you, speaking to some friends in Mexico, who live in Mexico, even though the Catholic Church has officially condemned her, lots of Catholic churches in Mexico will have a sort of behind closed doors, out of the public eye, little Santa Muerte shrine. I think a lot of people get the wrong idea about what that's all about because of her appearance, but it's a very diverse system of a belief system there, and a bunch of very diverse belief patterns with Santa Muerte. It's a fascinating topic to read about. And again, you'll see the different colored robe she's wearing based on what people are asking or petitioning her for. Because again, a big thing in Folk-Catholicism is asking saints to do something for you. Saint Expedite, the saint of the speedy miracle. People will make a little shrine to Saint Expedite, offer whatever, pray to him for a speedy miracle. The Saint Joseph thing, all these things are about offering something to the saints, oftentimes just veneration, and then in turn getting something. And I find this fascinating. Fascinating. I hope so did you. At the very least, I hope you found it interesting and relaxing. But that's all I have to say. This has always been a very interesting topic to me, one that I've always wanted to talk about. I just didn't necessarily have the vehicle to communicate it, to give me a reason to talk about it. So this is certainly not exhaustive. There's a bunch I missed out on, both because I didn't want this video to be an hour, and also I don't know everything. Even though I have a strong interest in theology and do a lot of research in different religious topics, I don't have, time to do as much research as others have. So, if it's something that interests you, I encourage you to do more research.